Welcome to the Know Your Ship podcast, presented by eHub. I'm your host, Frank Dolce.
A lot of the best lessons, a lot of the things that really cement skills, conviction, lots of stuff. And there's this huge irony in life that you experience, especially if you're a parent. But I think all of us, again, everyone experiences it at some level. And that's this desire to protect people around us and to protect ourselves from these horribly painful moments. And yet the best, really, the stuff that matters over the long term often comes out of that, those painful moments. And, you know, the metaphor, the parental metaphor is we would never, ever want our kids to get hurt. No one would say, I want my kid to get hurt. And yet, if they never get hurt, they're a lot less prepared for the world and prepared for the challenges and everything else than if they do. So whatever that Finding Nemo line about, well, you don't want to never do anything because then he'd never do anything.
Yeah, right.
So anyway.
Oh, I think it's a great analogy. And as I've observed the way that you've lived your life as a father and as a husband and as a business person, I would say you're really thoughtful about those things. And I think that's meaningful. As we're talking about maybe this pain avoidance, which is a common theme on this podcast. The obstacle is the way, you
touched on it with several folks.
Running on it into hard things. And it's natural for people to want to avoid the hard things. So when you run up against that and you have to make a decision and you know this path is going to be more difficult, potentially much more lucrative in many ways, or I could go down this path and it looks really, it looks really nice and smooth journey. What is your process? How do you decide, well, I'm going to go the hard way?
Yeah. I wish there were a formula for that. And life, I think, and business and all these things, it needs to be a balance. Like the goal of trying to be happy or comfortable all the time is a horrible, horrible goal. That horrible. It's wonderful to be happy some of the time. And my gosh, you should strive, I think, for being happy and content and just enjoying, savoring things some of the time. But you better push it some of the time too. And that just comes up over and over and over again. You and I have had a little bit of a conversation similar to this, maybe on a bike ride, and thinking about, even just a bike ride. You want parts of a bike ride to be just enjoyment, just savor the moment and see what's around. But you also want part of a bike ride to be, can I do more? Can I push this a little more? Can I go a little harder? So anyway, that's maybe a silly analogy.
No.
But I think it's so true for life and for business and all these things. Avoiding having things be hard is not the goal. That would be a horrible goal.
I think the bike ride analogy is perfect because my style of riding is first of all, I don't do technical things because I don't want to break my body. And I've watched Scott Huntsman and other people break their body. So I'm a little more cautious about that.
You totally threw me under the bus on that stuff.
What are you talking about? I don't know what you mean. Regarding this guy.
We'll come back to who does what, that's whatever. But go ahead.
Yeah, by the way, you are that guy. Like, I have never been more physically damaged than when you decide to have an adventure in Moab or wherever it is. And by the way, it's well known within the family that when Tom says,
Yeah.
let's go do this, then all of us, the rest of 20 or 30 plus of us say, hold on, this is the inflection point.
I like to think that I have some level of self-awareness, and clearly I do not. I just
Not in that.
not in that realm.
Well, if we're going back to the bike analogy, I would rather, if there are two paths and one you can go around and one you can go up and over, I'll pick the up and over because it makes the other part so much more enjoyable.
That's right.
Like I did this, I accomplished this, and I think that's a meaningful thing. And but I also think that you have something that not everybody has in your ability to manage difficulty and stress and hard things just better. Like with more thoughtfulness and more calm and maybe even more focus. I think a lot of successful people do that. And so my question about that is that something that you have always had? Is that something that you have developed? Or did you see people who did that and you thought, well, I want to do that too?
I love that you think that, and I actually don't know that that's really true about me, but I would hope for that to be true. Like I would aspire for that to be true. And I don't know. It just gets back to this thing like push yourself. When there is something, and it could be as simple as on a bike ride, but it's in business or in a relationship or in whatever. Don't just coast. And the goal isn't just to be happy about it. That I think push yourself. And guess what? When you push, things break occasionally. Mm-hmm. You get in trouble. You get to a place where it's not clear what to do, but you work it out. And I think like so many things, just that pushing is something that you practice and something that you get better and better at. And you recognize how to deal with the problems a little more effectively than someone else. And you recognize it so quickly because when you get into a circumstance where something is broken or something did go wrong or something isn't the way you had expected it to go, either you have skills to cope at that moment with it, or you don't. And when you don't, it's terrifying. And when you do, it's just frightening. But anyway. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to offer this thought regarding what I think is a unique and distinct ability to solve problems and manage pressure in a calm and thoughtful way. If I look back on your childhood, and I had the great privilege of knowing both of your parents, and I would say that your dad, who is unbelievable, father of digital audio, and as you're talking about finding a problem and then wanting to solve the problem, that really seems to be aligned with what your father did. And maybe he did, I don't know enough about it, but maybe he did throughout his career. Like that was his thing.
Throughout his whole life, I think.
Okay, yeah. And so maybe that you got to live in that kind of world. Maybe that is something that helped you develop that skill. But I also had the great pleasure of knowing your mom, who was, I mean, if you think your dad was a force, and he was, I don't know how to describe Martha as a force of nature.
Yeah, that's a starting point, a force of nature, yeah.
And so I'm just curious about the combination of those two and how they affected your life.
In so many ways that are clear to me, and in so many ways more that I'm sure I don't even appreciate. But they both were remarkable people, and I am so grateful to be their son and to have benefited from all of that. But I think of the way that my dad, on the one hand, truly loved what he got to think about and loved to share it. My gosh, he taught for a living, but he also just loved to share knowledge, and people who knew him and still now 20 plus years later after he passed come up to me and talk about him. Talk about examples of that. His standing on a beach at Lake Powell in the middle of the night with a telescope with 20 young people just pointing out what was happening in the heavens and the stars and things like that. Or people pulling me aside and saying that he, as a professor, as a teacher, was the best teacher they ever had in their entire lives. And those kinds of things. He loved what he got to what he had the opportunity to think about and work on. So that was an element of passion. Not that he ever said, ever, you need to be passionate about something, but clearly that affected me. And then my mom, I just think, oh my gosh, what a social, interesting, engaged in other people, human she was. But also, I cannot tell you how many times I was sitting in the passenger seat of her car, or I was driving her somewhere, and she would say, don't we live in a beautiful place? She would just look up at Mount Olympus or something and just say, oh my gosh, that's so beautiful. And she would do that every day for years and years and years, decades that she lived here. So a gratitude and an enthusiasm and all that. It's not that I try to emulate it, but I do think about, okay, well, that was imparted to me by them. And I do want to be grateful and enthusiastic, like fundamentally.
Yeah.
Those are good things to be.
Are there any quality, like I look at my parents and I think, man, there's so many amazing things. I want to take all of those amazing qualities. And then I look at some of the other qualities. I think,
of course.
But I don't want any of those qualities. But people say to me all the time, like, you act just like your dad. But they don't mean it in like the complimentary way that I'm acting like my dad. Is there?
Of course, of course, of course. And again, that's fundamental human condition. We're all total losers in many ways too. Yeah. And sadly, we're not even aware of some of the ways we're just.
It's until everybody else points them out.
Exactly.
If you have a good friend, someone who will say to you, look.
Yeah.
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 And I think you have. I know one of those guys sat right in that couch, and I'm sure he would point out any, or maybe he would just willingly and try to find the fault. Hey, I just wanted you to know.
That's exactly right.
By the way, if you could just describe why your dad, Tom, is called the father of digital audio. I know just very surface level that the conversion between analog audio and digital was this enormous, time-consuming transformation. You just couldn't take analog and convert it easily to digital.
So he happened to be alive the way that, your daughter Alex and all of us, but he happened to be at kind of the college level in existence, the way Alex is experiencing AI. He was around when there was no such thing really as computer science. The department at MIT, which is where he went to school, was called electrical engineering. There was no such thing as a computer science department. Computers, quote unquote, were a new and emerging thing. And he was fascinated just in life by, when he was 8 years old, the gift his family gave him was a movie projector. And he didn't just use it, he took it apart and built it back. And he just loved those kinds of things, but he loved good music as he was going to school at MIT. And he was so infuriated that the way it sounded when you were sitting there was nothing like the way it sounded when you heard it recorded. And so he, as a college and then a graduate school project, he was just working on that thing. How could you make sound, how could you make a recording sound more like the live performance? He came up with a thing called DBX, which was analogous to, it was a alternative to Dolby at the time. And Dolby noise reduction was a very small thing at the time. But because he came up with that at MIT owned that thing. And then he had this idea, which was, wow, if the problem with the audio recording is always similar. It always sounds like there's this psh in the background when you're listening to the recording, and that's obviously not there when you're listening to the live event. And it's not because there's a fan in the room.
If you just heard that and you're listening, go back to the start of this podcast, and you'll hear a distinct whirring sound in the background. That was the fan.
Yeah. He thought his idea was, if you could digitize the sound, that hiss would be a pattern, and you could use math. You could use a computer to just subtract that pattern out of the sound and get to a more pure sound. So he went off on this exercise to say, well, how would you digitize sound? That was something that people understood pretty well in a sense, meaning a sound wave. It's just a wave. You can create a digital representation of a wave. But could you do that fast enough to record? And at the time, it took many, 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 many hours for a computer to digitize a waveform, a sound waveform. Well, you can't make a digital recording until you can make a second's worth of audio in a second. You have to be able to do it in real time. Anyway, he worked on that and came up with the first digital recording and editing equipment that existed in the world. Built a company around that called SoundStream here in Utah, actually. And it was interesting. A guy named Amar Bose, who built Bose Speaker Corporation, he and my dad were working on some things at MIT at the time, and he spoke at my dad's retirement party years ago. And he said, you know, Tom used to tell me that someday everything would be digital. And Amar Bose, could not understand what he meant. And he said, I'm not sure still that I understood what he meant. But it is true. I mean, we're sitting here in the studio and everything is digital, except the sound coming out of our mouths going into these mics. But everything after that's digital here. Pretty darn
Are you sure?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't see any analog equipment anywhere. So anyway, it is mind-bending that just being there at a moment in time for him. He was, by the way, sorry, I don't imply anything other than he was truly a genius. I mean, he was brilliant at a different level than most humans by a long shot. He was brilliant, but he was also in the right place at the right time for that thing to be a thing. And we've all of us, myself, you, we're all in the right place at the right time for something. If we are curious, and if we're pushing on something, and if we're willing to and capable of looking ahead. Not that anyone can know the future. That's not, you can't know or predict the future very well in any specific way, but you can look forward to what is implied by what's happening. And I look and think about AI right now, and other things too, but AI because I pay attention to technology and things like that. And I just think, oh my gosh. Like if you think about what is going to be possible before very long, it's stunning. And there are a lot of things that you could work on that will wind up changing the world.
I was going to ask you something completely differently, and then you said something that made me want to follow up on this. How do you mean, or how can you expand on the thought that we are all here right now at the right time, but we have to find it?
Yeah. Sure. I think that is always true. Anyone who has ever existed is in a terrible place, a frightening place, and in a miraculous place. It's just the nature of life and humanity. When I was a lot younger, though I'm still very young.
You're young.
I'm still very young.
Very young.
No, but when I was in high school, the really terrifying things were population explosion. There were going to be way, way too many people on Earth soon to feed them, to anything. Pollution was a really horrible thing, and maybe the scariest thing for America at the time was the threat of the Cold War and nuclear. And it was literally like life is going to end. Like one small wrong move and all life is going to end. Well, that feels like conversations we're having today. The problems are different.
It's so true.
The rate of population growth came way down. Now, by the way, to the point that it's kind of scary that
Maybe it's the wrong way.
Yeah. But pollution, we talk a lot about climate change now as opposed to physical, like what's on the streets and in the gutters and all of that stuff. But it's a terrifying thing. And guess what? Life as we know it may end. Like, it doesn't take very much for, and I guess it's a little bit more vague. It's not so pinpoint specific like the Cold War and a nuclear battle was, but AI and a lot of people have views about like political situations and things like that might really be catastrophic.
Yeah.
Anyway, we always live at a time when there's a lot that's terrifying and there's a lot that's remarkable. But I think that if you focus on what might be and you go listen to people who think about what might be, and you can find something that's really intriguing to you about what might be, and then just keep going deeper about that, the opportunity is always there. Are you motivated enough to get after it?
I'm so glad that we talked about that, because my perspective on things like AI is I'm like, if there's such thing as a late adopter, then I'm beyond that. Like, I keep pushing against it. It's terrifying to me. And maybe it's because of the Arnold Schwarzenegger movies or something. I think AI is going to take over, and what happens to the human. And so, but your perspective feels more like, wait, you can have a different perspective about it. And if you do, maybe you can see a different pathway, a more positive pathway, or even a lucrative pathway in what is happening. It's not changing. It's not going to go away.
Yeah.
How do you align with it, work within it?
Yeah, and and there's so many interesting people who are commenting on it and things like that. And you can, of course, like anything, it could be a very dangerous substance, and that may wind up being the thing that wins, like. Nuclear arms were a very, very dangerous thing, and the bad outcome from them might still be, but at the time when it was most terrifying, might have been global thermonuclear war and the end of humanity.
Yeah.
But what actually happened was it was an effective deterrent for a lot of things for a very, very long time. It created a peace that would not otherwise have existed, almost certainly, for a very long time. So anyway, and I think AI or any other thing that you could think of is like that. And I don't mean to the world talk so much about AI right now because it's so freaking exciting. It's not the only exciting thing by any stretch of the imagination, but my son, my youngest, he's in college still. He's a junior in college in chemistry. Well, AI is going to change chemistry. When you can run thousands and thousands and thousands of experiments a second,
Right.
instead of the way, pouring things in beakers and things like that. You still need to do some of that to get the data set. But when you can take all of the data that's ever been gathered about what happens in chemical reactions and then just run that experimentally with ways that very, very fast, very powerful computers can understand the outcome. You can do different things with chemistry than have ever been possible so much faster. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Did you remember the movie War Games? With
Of course.
All of a sudden I had this thought of War Games about running those simulations over and over and over.
Oh, yeah.
And did Matthew Broderick save the world? Because I don't know if I believe that. Is that what happened?
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened there, but
I think a lot of people would say that. I'm not sure what happened there.
Yeah.
Anyway. Okay, I want to go back now to this other thing I was going to ask you about because you made an interesting decision early in your life, and one of your kids did the same thing with regard to your education. And I'm just curious if that was something that you decided to do, or if you found yourself in a situation with a genius father and this amazing mother and family situation that gave you the confidence to do something like this. But you decided early on that you were going to leave the comfort of your local high school. I believe that was Highland High.
Yes, it was.
And you were going to travel all the way across the country and go to a prep school.
Yeah.
At Exeter.
Yeah. So my family moved here as not Mormons. My dad came to help start the computer science department at the U. And I grew up with this incredible mom who just immersed us in all things that were going on. But, we were, whatever, I don't know what fraction of Utah in our neighborhood was LDS back then, but it was a lot. It was a lot. So part of me, always growing up, was thinking, okay, well, do I really fit here? And is this really the real world, or is this, some kind of bubble and so on? And then I'm an angsty teenager, and really just lots of things that are typical, I think, of angsty teenager. And I got in my mind at some point, I want to go someplace else. I want to go see what the real world is like. And my parents regularly hosted people, friends of my parents from the East Coast, for ski trips and things like that. And one time I hear one of them talking about their son who had gone to prep school for an academic experience, a summer program experience, but that doesn't matter. Anyway, that he had loved. I thought, I want to do that. And so without my parents knowing, actually, I went and did a little research in the library and found, as far as I could, this person had gone to Phillips Academy, and as far as I could tell, there were two, Phillips Exeter and Phillips Andover. So I applied to both. And got in. Well, what really happened was I got a letter back from Exeter saying, we're full. You've missed the deadline for the real applications. We're full. But if you are willing to go to Denver for an interview, we might have a space for you at just after the holiday break. And so I had to tell my parents that I had received this letter, and they paid for me to fly to Denver for an interview that happened in the airport. And I got in, and then I thought, okay, great. And what I didn't think carefully enough about was how many parts of my life that would break also. Like things that I had wanted to do my whole life that were my aspirations for high school, a regular high school experience. What do I want to do? I want to play football. I want to sing. I want whatever. Yeah, you can't do that if you just leave partway through your junior year. So anyway, but I did that. I went back to New England, went to school, and you've heard me say before, it was absolutely devastating. I truly believed that, like, without even thinking about it, by the way, I truly believed that anything in the world I wanted to do, I was capable of. Like, if I put my mind to it, I could be, of course, I could get the best grades. I could get anything I wanted to do, I was capable of. And I went to this school, and suddenly it became crystal clear to me that that wasn't true at all. There wasn't even a shadow of that. And it so badly devastated my self-esteem to realize, oh my gosh, this person I thought I was, especially when it comes to academics and intelligence, that's a lie. That's just not true. I am nowhere near. I'm not even in the whatever. I'm not even the top 50% or anything close to that among these people. And it was just awful. It was brutalizing. And I at Exeter, I would study every single waking second. Like if I could open my eyes and study, I was studying. And I worked as hard as I could, and I was still getting a C and B minus, and it blew my mind. Anyway, I finished a semester at Exeter with that just horrible self-awareness destruction, so different than I had ever thought. And I had to make a decision about whether to go back to Exeter, which was an awful choice, or to go back to Highland, where everything I had ever wanted to do as a senior was no longer an opportunity. You know, the things I had aspired for there. And therefore I was just left with two horrible, painful, depressing choices. Eventually I decided I could not go back to Exeter. It just wasn't, I didn't have it in me. It was too awful. And yet I also felt awful about staying here. And at some point my mom pulled me aside and said, actually, you need to go back to Exeter. And I just thought she was wrong, and yet she was right. Mm-hmm. She was right. You had to go face it. And I'm so grateful that she pushed me that way. And anyway, I'm so grateful I went back. I went back with this attitude like, look, I'm going to fail here no matter what. So I might as well enjoy things a little bit better.
My downfall.
I'm enjoying my downfall, the flaming pile of death. So I just resolved I was going to study less, and I was going to meet some people. Mm-hmm. I really hadn't had any social experiences that were meaningful, all these things. And guess what? When I studied half as much, I actually got better grades. And I did meet some people whom I loved. They were great people, and I started to learn some things way beyond academics and the academics, and it changed me and rebuilt my self-esteem on something other than whatever it had been built on before. And just a lot of good lessons about life for me personally, but I think a lot more generally, that you can get through hard things.
Well, when you say that, I was just thinking of the word grit, and I know that we talk about that a lot, but you have to go through experiences like that, and thank goodness for Martha to be there to say, no, you're not coming back to Highland.
Yeah.
You're going to go and finish this. And is that a quality? So from that experience, there's lots of things. One, it clearly transformational for you in terms of an individual and probably in your professional life. But when you are dealing with situations like that, or in the way I'm asking this is, if you are working with people who are going through challenging things, can you lean on that experience and help guide people through hard times?
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. Again, back to this, the way we started, that hard things are good things and important things. And even when they are awful, they can be really good. And it's not that I'm advocating make things hard for yourself or make things harder than they need to be. That's not the right answer. But don't avoid hard things, I think is really right. And I do think a lot of people benefit from and would benefit more than societally we let things happen right now. From just like, go take on the harder thing.
Yeah.
Dig in and take it on.
Well, so, and I think that probably has something to do with the way that you manage hard things now. You've had to go through them, you've been through them, and now you see the pathway through. So I think that's really interesting. In terms of the education side, that experience at Exeter, did that guide you in your next choice of, well, this is where I'm going to go to university and I want to do graduate school here? Did that provide some focus or strategy for how you managed the rest of your education?
Maybe, but I just think how much luck I had, truly luck. There is no reason that I should have been able to go to any really good school after the grades I got at Exeter. And when I think about the people I was applying, I still applied to the best schools in the country. Mm-hmm. It's all I had ever thought I wanted to do as a young teenager. I want to go to a great school, education super important. I want to go to a school that's not in Utah, which is where I was growing up, because I want to see the world. All those things I had thought, and I really thought, going back to Exeter my senior year, all of those things weren't going to be an opportunity. I was still going to try, but
sure,
no one with a C gets into a really good school. And luck was I went to Hanover, New Hampshire, Dartmouth College, which was one of the places I was applying. Not my first choice, but my gosh, I didn't have a full appreciation for how lucky I would be to even get to go there. An appreciation, not a full appreciation. Anyway, and I happened to run up from the river where I was rowing in a crew race, run up to the admissions office in order to deliver a letter or just say hello or something. And the person who answered the door was the director of admissions, with whom I had no appointment. And he spent more than an hour talking with me. And later, when I was on the wait list to get in to Dartmouth, was on the wait list. I kept calling the office saying, hey, have you heard anything? Whatever, over and over and over again. And eventually someone said, stop calling. If you hadn't had a conversation with the director of admissions, you wouldn't even be on this wait list. So it's unlikely you're going to get in, and stop bugging us. And so luck, just good fortune. Anyway, you were asking a question about plan and influence.
Yeah, your educational strategy.
I hope I always have a plan. And I aspire to always have some goal in mind, something that is worth working on for the company, for the whatever. But it's rare that things go right as planned. Really, really, really rare. The huge exception. And adaptability, the ability to kind of improvise for the way things actually go,
Yeah.
I think is the bigger skill. But
Interesting. You know, as we're talking about this, I keep having this thought of you in high school at Highland, and then you jump on your laptop and you just Google Exeter and find out about, and then I'm thinking, wait,
yeah, there was no
didn't-
laptop.
that didn't exist. I'm like, why did he run up to the admissions office? You could probably just email him. No.
No?
You have
Yep.
to run up. It was a different time. Did you
Yeah.
have a rotary phone back then?
Oh, yeah.
My gosh. The good old days. Do you know our kids, like, I don't think your kids they might not even know what a rotary phone is.
No, I'm sure they don't. But that's
How
okay.
How sad.
Yeah, well,
To have to die. Was it the zero? The zero you had to dial, and it took so long to get back.
tick, 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 tick.
Yes.
Yeah. But, we don't know how to make Instagram settings work and how to put a sticker on a reel. And
Speaking of social media, we have a dumb brother-in-law. Like, there's a couple of really smart brothers-in-law, and then we have one who is lacking. But that guy has somehow posted the most ridiculous yet entertaining holiday video of all time, and now he's an influencer?
yeah, it's set for life. I'm sure he's got offers coming in by the hour.
Wow.
Luck, good fortune.
Right place,
Yeah.
right time.
Yeah, thank goodness for that.
Yeah, no kidding. None of that.
I
Well,
just feel bad for him for the thirst trap he's got to post next in order to keep
right.
that going.
That's the thing. What's next? Good luck. What's next? If you need some thoughts, I have ideas. Anyway, okay. So you moved along from Exeter, and then you went to Dartmouth. Were you rowing before Dartmouth, or did you row at Dartmouth?
I wrote at Exeter.
Okay.
And then at Dartmouth.
And at Dartmouth, there's a picture of you hanging on the wall, I think in your house, of you rowing, and it's very impressive. Much more impressive physically than you are today.
Which isn't
Physically, you're not
Yeah.
too intimidating.
but no, those were fun, remarkable times. Really amazing.
And then you moved on to. Did you go directly to Stanford?
No, I worked for a company called the Boston Consulting Group, BCG, in Boston for a couple of years.
In between, and then
Yeah.
went to get MBA at Stanford.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in totality, as you look across your educational experience, I mean, obviously there's an influence in your life. Would you have done anything differently as you look across that experience, and how meaningful was that to you, being in all of those places during those times?
Holy cow. I can't think of anything I would have done differently, meaning I don't have any regrets about any of that. And so unbelievably fortunate, especially with Stanford, because, again, I can't believe I had the privilege of any of those places. And at Stanford, all of my heroes were there. I mean, Steve Jobs was between jobs at Apple, where he had been fired, and his next thing, he was building Next Computer at the time and dating a classmate of mine. And I got to spend quite a bit of time with him and guys like Scott McNeely, who was building Sun Microsystems, and Chuck Schwab, who was building Schwab. Just all these people who were people that I got enough exposure to realize, wow, these are just people. They're just interesting, super interesting people, but not superhuman. And hearing them and listening to them and seeing what they were doing, that was just unbelievably lucky. And I would say on top of that, Stanford was the first time in my life, the substance of the academics, where it wasn't school and a requirement. It was a joy to get to study that stuff. I would have done that stuff the coursework, the everything, just for fun. I just loved it. Loved it. So I feel incredibly fortunate about that.
Well, I have a couple questions to follow up on that. And the first one I think I'd like to ask is, we've talked about this before, and you just mentioned the coursework, but in terms of coursework versus the people you had an opportunity to be around, can you say one was more important than the other?
Way more important, the people. Way more important. The coursework was awesome, and I think, oh my gosh, Jim Collins was my professor. You know, I hung out with him 3 times a week, and yeah, he was writing these books. What books? Whatever. He was just that guy there in the class. So he was both an academic person and a person that I think, wow, you know, look where I was at that moment in time. But I think that in general, school, the academics of school are such a tiny fraction of what you get out of school. They're great so many places. You can have such good academic rigor so many places. But you better recognize that that's just a tiny, tiny little fraction of what you're getting out of the academics. It's the people and learning how to deal with jerks and the time planning and balance, and all of those things are probably the more important lessons that you get out of school.
Yeah.
And really, just learning how to learn, that's the biggest deal. And you then set a path to keep learning for the rest of your life. I think you can get that lots and lots and lots and lots of places.
Yeah.
You better appreciate the people you're around and figure out how to be inspired by those people, and what are those people showing you the way to do all that.
And to follow up on that, regarding those people and surrounding yourself with those types of people, or being in an element with all of those people around, is there a way to boil down, like, and I know that you still maintain relationships with and contact with all of those people, which I think is really fascinating. Is there a way to boil down all of these successful people, a specific trait or whatever the superpower is that makes them successful? Is there
I have no idea.
Is there one thing? Is, like, you know, in the movie City Slickers, there's one thing, but you have to figure it out. Like,
there is one thing. You're exactly right. There is. And you have to figure it out. No, I don't know. Everyone that I've felt like, wow, that person is just impressive. They have more of a willingness to, in an optimistic way, say that can be done. And interesting, we touched on the Musk book at the beginning.
Yes, I was hoping you would talk about that.
And there is a lot about Musk. He is weird and he is evil. And by the way, I've spent a lot of my life hating that guy for a reason we can come back to later. But this book, that book, and the way the one thing that comes out of that book for me is his knowledge-based, insight-based skill, superpower of telling everyone around him, no, this can be done. Like when everyone's saying, sorry, that can't be done. It can't be done in that time frame. It can't be done at all. It can't be done. What he is not blindly saying, no, it can. He's based on things he believes deeply, that he has knowledge about. He's saying, no, it can and it will. We need more of that in the world, really. It's impressive. And all of the people I've known that I really admire have a version of that.
Yeah.
Like most of the people around them are saying, yeah, I don't think that's possible. And yet they are charting a path to make it possible. And they don't always succeed. You fail because if everyone thinks it's not possible, there are probably good reasons they think it's not possible. And there's surely pitfalls along the way. But that skill and conviction and energy to say, no, I think it's possible, and here's why, and let's go after it. That's.
Have you tried to utilize that way of thinking about problems and the world in your professional life?
Sure, of course.
And do you have a specific? Okay, so let's just run through that really quickly. So you went from Stanford. Did you go right to Sonic from Stanford?
No, I actually ran a U.S. Senate campaign
that's
for a
right.
Democrat in the 1992 election cycle.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Did you think you were going to get into politics? And then that experience was like, no, I'm never getting into politics.
Exactly. No, I didn't think I was going to get into politics. This person said, look, a Democrat's never going to win using any old ways. We need to break the mold and do this, which, by the way, he was kind of foolish to do. Mm-hmm. I knew nothing. I was in so far over my head doing that. But it was also deeply disappointing and just disillusioning. That was really a hard thing. And yet, so many great lessons came out of it.
I'll bet.
Politics is this realm so different than business in this way. All that matters is 51% market share. You don't need 57% market share. 51%, and the world is yours. And 49%, and you're a failure. Anyway, so politics is very stark in this country that way.
Yeah.
And what that means and how do you affect things at the margin and all. I'm so grateful for all of those lessons that came out of that.
And so grateful to leave it behind.
So grateful to leave it behind.
I think it's interesting coming out of our last election cycle, which has been crazy. But Dana White, who is the head of UFC's nuts, right? Like UFC is nuts. Mm-hmm. Dana White got involved in the election cycle a little bit, and now he said, I'm done. Yeah. He runs UFC. Here's the guy's like, I'm never getting involved with politics. It's too nuts.
Yeah, it's nuts. It is nuts. But anyway.
Okay, so you ran the campaign.
Yeah.
And then is that from that point to Sonic?
Yeah.
From Sonic to Ticketmaster?
City Search.
Oh, right. City Search for a brief stint.
Yeah.
How long were you at City Search?
2 years-ish.
Gotcha. Okay. And then had an opportunity with Ticketmaster.
Yeah.
And Ticketmaster to Ancestry. And Ancestry brought you back to Utah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then Ancestry to ExpertVoice.
Yeah. Well, Ancestry to investing, advising.
You took a little time.
I was just an independent
Yeah.
investor advisor for about 5 years, and then to ExpertVoice.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in all of those experiences, can you say is there a story in any of those or all of those experiences where you ran into this, we can't do this?
Oh.
And you said, well, no.
Not just an experience. It's all day, every day. I think being an executive, certainly being a CEO, but being an executive of any type, and whether you're the VP of marketing or whether when you have people who work for you, that's what an executive's job is a whole bunch of people come to you daily, say, sorry, we can't do what you said we should do. And you have to either understand that they're right, you messed up trying to tell them to go do that, or you gotta, set out something that it can break through that. It's all day, every day. It's not an example.
Just
it's truly all the time. That's what building a company is about.
Yes, sir. Okay. Is there any story in particular about any of the experiences you had where you could demonstrate this. Well, we have to do this. There was some pushback. By the way, I'm putting you on the spot. You don't have to tell a story. I have lots of other questions in my mind that I can ask, but if you do have a story, we'd love to hear it. And I could ask you something else, and if the story pops up, then you can break into that as well.
Yeah, so many. The one that is springing to mind, the one that's most poignant for me was at ExpertVoice. We had been growing so nicely, so well, exactly what you want to have happen in a startup tech company, which, by the way, in most startup tech companies is some form of we're making less money than we are spending, but we're doing it in a way that the world believes our future is this great, big, much bigger thing. And therefore, investors are willing to fund that, the gap. And we were having great success, and then all of a sudden we weren't. And it was for a variety of reasons that were awful and painful, and you go through layoffs and other things that are so hard and painful for so many people. You're disappointed in yourself as a leader. You're, firing people or letting them go in a way that they weren't expecting. And anyway, awful.
Yeah.
But when you regroup around, but we're going to make this happen, and here's what we're going for now, and here's what it's going to look like, that getting people to sign up for that, even when they don't really understand every element of it, but they understand enough of it that they're willing to say, yeah, I'm going to throw myself at this problem with the ways I know how to contribute. That's just, that can be super rewarding. And you realize really quickly who are the people who are not just in for the good times, but who are the people who are there for the hard times too, willing to do the hard work. And anyway, that's a poignant example for me in a not too distant past.
Yeah.
But you go through things like that, gone through some form of that almost everywhere I've been. At some point, you're doing something, it doesn't go like you were hoping it might go, and you're suddenly confronted with a lot of people who are thinking, yeah, that's not possible. Whatever vision you were selling or path you were selling, that's not possible. And you have to adjust it enough, but not too much, and find the people who are willing to buy in and go forward, which is incumbent on you. How well can you articulate?
Yeah.
This is what we're trying to do. We understand enough collectively, all of us, to get it done, and let's go do it.
You're talking about a couple different things there. One with people and what I would equate to culture, and the other is the strategy piece of a business. And there's a famous book and saying culture eats strategy for lunch. How do you feel about that?
It's so right. That is so right. Because, by the way, the real strategy comes out of the people. And so either you have the culture of people who are focused on solving a problem over and over again, whatever the new problem is today, or you don't. And you can have a really good strategy, or frankly, a not very good strategy. And, if you don't have the right culture, you won't be able to execute on the good strategy. And if you don't have the right culture, your people won't point the way to the good strategy out of the bad. So anyway, yes, it is certainly the case that culture eats strategy. Doesn't mean you don't need a good strategy. You do need, but how do you know where to point and what to do? It's your own knowledge, but it's also what you gather from the people around you, from your customers, from all sorts of inputs. They show you the way to the right strategy.
Yeah. Speaking of people, we've talked about it, you've been around a lot of amazing people, present company included. Who have been the most influential? And can you point to any lessons or thoughts about why they were so influential?
I've been around so many remarkable people, and I am still, and I hope I look for what's remarkable in all people. The people it's easiest in an almost cliche way to say are people like Jobs and things like that. I mean, my gosh, he was heroic to me. He was incredible. But then I would also say, the person that has been most influential in my life and is still most influential is my wife. And there is no human I know of who is better at appreciating another human, like finding what's good in someone and not projecting what's good in them, like genuinely like finding and understanding what's good in them and all. And I do aspire to that more all the time. What's someone capable of? What's good in them? Anyway, she's
not true. But
amazing.
we call her Mother Kristen or Saint Kristen in the family. Whenever something happens, especially around the holidays, whenever there is someone to be recognized or some accolade to be given, or maybe even not given, you can count on Kristen setting the bar, and no one.
She's an amazing.
No one
human.
reaches the bar that she sets.
Whatever. It's too much of a throwaway line now, but I say, I only know for sure I've done one thing well. I married well. Everything else turned out all right.
And you met her at
second grade.
How long did it take you to close that deal?
20 years.
Jeez.
Met when we were 8. It took me until we were 28 to wear her down. But she did, so.
Is she finally? Yeah. Well, good for you. You did absolutely marry well. Okay. In terms of how you like to be viewed in the professional community or in your personal life, how much do you think about that? Like, do you have a strategy on, I want people to think about Tom Stockham in this way, and because of that, I'm going to, or is that even a thought or a concern?
I'm sure that is more of a thought than any of us would like to acknowledge. I would say, I think that. I know I like to be liked, of course. And Kristen would say that's way too important to me. But the way I think about it is I want people to be excited about where we're going together. So in a business or with my kids or with a bike ride with you.
Yeah.
I use some amount of storytelling and some amount of painting a picture of what's going to happen to say, let's go after that with enthusiasm. And anyway, that is more emblematic of what is going on. And it's not that I'm like in a stilted way trying to do that. I just noticed that about myself. I can't help myself but try and paint a picture of what might happen. That's exciting.
Yeah. Okay. So the reason I asked that is because you nailed it. Like, that's how I view you. It's like, if there's something to do or something to be done, and often for me, it's like, I'm like, I don't know if I really want to do that. If you're involved, then all of a sudden I'm like, yeah, I'm definitely doing that. Like Tom said, and that's your personality.
I think it is
engaging. And so I was just curious if like you get up in the morning like, I have to do this because Frank's not going to want to do it. And so I have to be super engaged to get him to go and do that.
No, I want to be excited about the things I'm going to go do.
And you are.
I mean, truly.
It's very clear.
And that's what I want. And I don't want to do them alone. The most rewarding thing in my business life is let's go build something together. Like this group of people, we're going to go build this thing. I love that. I absolutely love that. But in all elements of my life, my gosh, I love let's do this together. And some wonderful things happen by accident, but let's be purposeful. Like let's have a set of things that we're out to go do, and let's make them happen. So
yeah, it is kind of a superpower, a Tom superpower. So I'm glad that we got a chance to talk about that. Okay, and so I was going to ask you this question, but I don't know that I really need to ask it anymore. But you can answer it if you'd like. Like, what is the best advice you've ever received, or what is the best advice you've ever given? And I hesitate because it feels like we just talked about that. Like the way that you live your life is the best advice that you give.
Well, I don't know. You've asked that of other people before. I don't know. I don't have a moment that came down to like that's the advice I center on, and that's a perfect answer. Like I ask that question sometimes, and people get stuck. It's a hard thing to think about. And what was that particular moment? And I think we could all reach and say, well, I had this thing, I had this thing, I had this thing. There's something to learn from everyone.
Absolutely.
And so
I think that's the right approach.
I would aspire to continue to be more curious about other people, learn what they have to teach and inspire you with. And
yeah, absolutely.
Who knows?
Well, I could talk to you for another hour. Fortunately, we're related, so I probably will at some point.
I appreciate it.
In the next several
I'm
days.
flattered you to have me here. You asked, and I said,
and you.
There are a lot better people than I would be in this.
Was it
thing.
like that, or was it like nobody wants to go on that podcast? Why would I ever put myself in that position? And then Kristen said, "Tom, you're going to do that podcast, and you're going to do it well. You're going to give it 100%." Okay, so you're kind of in this. Well, I don't know. I'll let you describe your current professional state, and I'm going to let you tell us what's on the horizon for Tom Stockham.
When people ask right now, I say I'm on hiatus. I'm not retired, but I'm not doing, I'm not professionally engaged in any one specific way deeply. Likely, I will probably work on building at least one more company. We'll see. I have something that I'm going to work on for a little while, but may not be able to make happen. But we'll see. We'll see.
If you need to do a podcast about that thing, I know a guy.
Excellent.
Who could host it.
How convenient.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty cheap, too. Many ways. Well, that's kind of exciting. Can you give us any indication of what that might be? Industry or?
It builds on things I've done in the past. I'm sorry to be so vague.
Like
I shouldn't even have brought it up.
So like a Lego sort of scenario.
Exactly.
No, you should have brought that up. Okay, I'm going to ask you one last question before I let you wander off into the wilderness. By the way, have you gotten all your shopping done? Do you do shopping for the holidays?
Oh, yeah. I love it.
You do?
I get way more excited about what some things I'm going to give.
Yeah, for sure.
Than
I do
getting.
too.
Yeah, so
I do
anyway,
too.
No, I love it.
And that may be because of the quality of gifts I receive. I feel like I'm way more thoughtful for other people. That's only partially true.
Yeah.
Okay. If you had a chance to PR at Leadville and not just beat Lance Armstrong, which you did this year, or building a business.
The post doping era has not been good to Lance.
But did you dope when you just rode? What were you doing?
Yeah. Kristen asked me before Leadville at some point, because when you train that much, and I crashed in a race, a pre-Leadville race.
Yeah.
What happens if something goes wrong that day? And my genuine answer was, you know what? I could crash right out in the first 100 yards. And it would have been amazing, because it was all the preparing, and it was all the. I got my Strava summary the other day, and my top 3 riding companions were 2 of my sons and my brother. And I just thought, life is good. I got to spend all that time with those people. So
amazing.
Leadville was awesome. It was so fun. It was I felt like a great accomplishment. But it was really the preparing and stuff that I loved, and I would way rather, in the scheme of things, I would way rather do anything with a team of people. Mm-hmm. Go do something interesting, build something interesting, achieve something interesting with a team of people.
Gotcha. Well, I lied, because I'd have one more last question. Take a risk, or take the safe route.
Oh,
I know
risk.
what you're going to say.
The risk.
I know what you're going to say.
It's just,
I had this. So I was fortunate enough to get a Bronco a couple years ago, and as a part of this new Bronco owner club, you have this opportunity to go to several places within the United States, and then they show you all of the capabilities of the Bronco. One of the places is Moab.
Yeah.
And so. And I know you love Moab. And so as they're describing what you're going to do in this Bronco, which is terrifying to me, like terrifying, they said, well, you can bring a guest. And I said to myself, there's only one guy that I know. And it wasn't even, I just called and I barely uttered the words Bronco Adventure.
I'm available that day.
That's exactly what you said. That's exactly what you said. So in terms of risk taking, I think it's not just in your personal life, because you do take, well, what I would consider risks, maybe more calculated, and you do that in your professional life as well.
I don't know. That's one of these places where back to the theme off the top, I may just not be self-aware. I am not self-aware, evidently, because I would never take a risk that I thought, oh, this is likely to turn out badly. But let's go have some fun. Let's go do something interesting. Yeah. Let's go. If there is no risk, then it's not an adventure. If you know for sure the outcome, then it's not an adventure.
Oh, I love that. That's exactly where we're going to leave it. If there is no risk, then it's not an adventure. If you already know the outcome, then it's not an adventure. Yeah. I have a whiteboard over here. You can't see it. I write really interesting quotes on there. Most of them are like Epictetus and Seneca and Marcus Aurelius. You may have just made the board.
Wow.
As a first modern day scholar. And favorite brother-in-law?
I've got to get back to you on that one. I've got to think through the list.
Tom Stockham. He's an industry leader, all-around good guy, and his superpower is let's go do this together. Let's go have fun. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you being here today. Thank you.
I loved it. Thanks so much for having me.
We'll talk to you soon.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to the Know Your Ship podcast presented by eHub. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a review.